Shut up. From the first memory I have, we were in Auckland, then moved to Wellington. This is all before I was 5 years old. And I counted 30 houses that we had lived in before I was 5. My dad was a baker and he used to work all night, drink all day. He was an alcoholic for about 40 years, and then he gave his life to the Lord. Mum had left, she had enough of Dad's drinking. Dad didn't know how to look after 6 children and go to work at the same time. So the 4 eldest, which was myself and my oldest brother and 2 sisters, went to an orphanage for a time. I guess for a little kid not knowing what's going on, it was quite traumatic. The food, I remember not being able to go into the dining room. You had to have a handkerchief, otherwise you couldn't go in, and I had none. And it was breakfast and I was hungry. And I remember they had porridge, and by the time I had gotten into breakfast, they let me in after it finished. I spewed up. I couldn't eat the porridge, and until my adult years I couldn't eat porridge. Even the smell of it used to make me quite ill. I remember mopping the floor of that big building, and the floor was so cold it just made your whole body freeze. We stayed there for several months until our mum found out where we were and came to get us, and then we moved to Porirua with her, and she brought us up, solo mother with 6 kids. Mum, being a solo mother, had to work quite a few jobs just to feed us. We were pretty poor, but we never ever went without. I remember coming up to Huntly to stay with my dad and stepmother at about 10 years old. So Mum would stick me on the train, and it would take all night to get here, about 13 hours I think from Wellington. Travelling by myself, I used to read books. By the time I was 10, I'd read The Lion, Witch and the Wardrobe and Lord of the Rings. Sometimes they'd meet me here and sometimes not, but Dad was living in Otahu. He moved around quite a lot. I didn't know Otahu and Otahuhu were the same place. By 1 o'clock in the morning, everybody had come out of the pub in Otahu. I remember that. I got scared, jumped on the bus that was going to Otara, jumped off there, and then just picked the direction and started walking. I was looking at the moon and I thought, God can see me. That's his eye. I remember praying, asking God to help me, directions, and because I felt so lost. And the first house that I came to, I just decided I'd have to knock on every door to find my dad. And the first house that I knocked on the door, which was 1 o'clock in the morning, nearly 2 o'clock in the morning, my sister answered the door. By the time my dad woke up and saw that I was there, he asked me if I was working. It's like, I'm 12. So I went to school there for 2 weeks, and then they shipped me off again. I was my dad's pet, you know, and when he left, I really fretted for my dad. I didn't have a good relationship with my mum because she felt that I looked like Dad, reminded her of Dad, and of course she was so angry with him. She took a lot of that frustration out on me. When Mum met my stepfather, first he was courting Mum and then he moved in. I guess we didn't know what was going on, but she seemed to be happy for a time. But unfortunately, he'd come from a family of, I think he had 5 children before he met my mum. He was a pedophile and he was a sexual predator, I guess, with all our family. Because Mum was working all the time, hardly ever home, there was hardly anybody ever home. and I had this anger towards my mum. She had always kind of sent me off to go and stay here and there. I met up with my cousins at the marae. I jumped on the bus and went home with them. And so from then I got jobs. Worked at a laundromat, worked at EMI in Wellington, Petone. I just got jobs here and there to keep myself going. By 14, I was right out of home, and I had heard that the stepfather, he had moved on to another family. I never found out till years later, but he had moved on, and most of the women that he'd moved on to had children, multiple children. I got pregnant at 16. I wasn't in a relationship. I met my husband when I was 18. He was a solo dad, I was a solo mum. But of course I was still a child. He was a bit older than me, my first husband. And in my naivety, we got married, and he was full-on alcoholic. So my whole first marriage was like that. But it wasn't until I was about 19 that I walked past the hall and heard the music on my way to the shop to get a bread. I just thought, well, I'll just go in and have a listen. They were preaching, talking about God. Next minute I'm up at the altar. I didn't even know what that was about really, but I came away thinking, wow, there's something different. I think I've always known in my heart who God is, but he just opened himself up to me when I walked into that place one day and heard the preaching. So this is the Huntly Baptist Church where I go to now. I love my church. My husband met someone. I had asked God that I didn't want to be in that marriage anymore, but I didn't see a way out. So I remember asking God to please let me get out of this marriage, and when it happened, I was quite devastated. I just remember feeling that the whole sky would just swallow me up, and I felt paralysed. I was working at the time, I couldn't go to work. Probably the lowest point in my life. At the time that I separated from my ex-husband, my granddaughter was born, and just seeing her face and just understanding that another generation had been born was the highlight of my life, you know, in the darkest time. But now that I'm older, I realise how important music is, and I feel the love of God when I'm playing. Just every day from the time that my granddaughter was born, God just kept showing me words and giving me the music. Today I'm happily married. My husband now he's an ex-mob member, and he's also a minister. So we both share that testimony of our love for God today. So between the world that I've come out of, today I know that there is hope, and to carry on, just to keep going. I know without a doubt in my mind that God sits on the throne, and that God is the God of my life. Yeah.